Welcome everyone. For those that have already logged in,
Hello.
We'll give everybody just a minute to get stuff in today. Dave and Drew here together. We are, as per last week, we're doing sparkling today. So welcome to what is a very wet orange day. We've had to do a bit of a makeshift setup here today. Because we were inside the shed, but the noise of the rain on the shed is so loud it's almost deafening. So
we're not allowed to complain about the rain.
No.
Never complain about the rain.
So we're trying to make do. So you're actually in the rain, and we're sitting under cover. So enjoy.
And it's very wet, I must say.
Yeah.
It hasn't been the greatest start to 2020, but this is a damn sight better than last year in terms of weather.
Yeah.
So we're hoping that this might actually continue and actually get some moisture into the soil, which will last all winter, so that the vines have something to go on when spring comes around and they start growing, because they had bugger all at the start of this growing season.
Indeed. So, for those who have ordered a tasting pack this week, thank you very much. We're going to start with the two sparklings, the two Swift sparklings today, the Cuvée and the Rosé. And we're going to talk through, the idea here is that it's equivalent to you being in the cellar door. So you are free to ask questions. Emily, our assistant, will read them out. Apologies if the rain gets too loud, but
it's as good as we can do.
It's as good as we can do.
Now, if you have grabbed your bottles with great enthusiasm and pulled the cork with similar enthusiasm like Dave did, we all love the pop sound. It is very much part of sparkling culture to, even in Formula One, give it a bit of a shake and let it fly. But tradition should have it, and Tyson Seltzer, the renowned journalist that specialises in sparkling wine and champagne, might correct me, but you hold the cork and you twist the bottle slowly, and the sound should be barely perceptible. Some say akin to a nun farting. So if you can hear that, you've got better ears than the rest of us. But it's open. So open your bottles, pour your glass.
We're going to start with the Cuvée. So we'll start with a little bit of a history about Swift. So obviously Printhie is our primary business, Printhie Wines, and under that banner, Swift Sparkling, which is our surname.
I'd say alongside.
Alongside, or above, who knows. Alongside the Printhie brand. So Swift itself is purely traditional method sparkling wines. So that is wines that are fermented in bottles. So very similar to the Champenois. We use very similar tradition
exactly
styles,
the same techniques,
methods to make our wines that your favourite champagne is made using. So they are very traditional in that sense.
To go back a little bit, back in about 2009, I'd been at Printhie a couple of years, and Dave was the keenest to do some sparkling wine and, to do good sparkling wine. And I said, that sounds like a grand plan. I just don't have much experience with premium sparkling wine, so you better send me to Champagne to learn a thing or two. They agreed. Fabulous. So I went off to Champagne in the 2010 vintage. Now, the main purpose of that was not to reinvent the wheel. I mean, basically, most winemakers know how to make sparkling wine, but it's the detail and the intricacies that make the difference. And going to Champagne during the harvest, my head nearly exploded with new information that I was taking in, and I visited a whole bunch of great little grower producers, mainly on the Côte Blanc. They were exceedingly generous. They sort of knew where I was coming from. They let me taste whatever I liked. We went into vineyards, we harvested grapes, we pressed grapes, we tasted juice, we tasted ferments, we tasted stuff out of the bottle. So it did exactly what it was meant to do. We were able to take on a lot of detail and not reinvent the basic stuff. So as Dave said, the whole principle about Swift was to create a collection of wines that quite unashamedly we want to be amongst the best sparkling wines in Australia. Now, they're not champagne because the grapes are not grown in Champagne. They are sparkling wines from orange but we want them to be some of the best in Australia, and by doing that, in terms of a quality and a value proposition, we'd like to think that we compete with champagne, but we're not champagne. We have no pretense about replicating champagne, but we want to compete with them. So currently there is 4. There is the Cuvée, the Rosé, the Vintage, and the Vintage Blanc de Blanc. There is a 5th one which will be released when this COVID-19 thing is done and we can make a bit of a song and dance about it. The first batch is disgorged and just biding its time, and that is a Blanc de Noir, so made entirely from red grapes. So that's something really exciting to look for. But today is the Cuvée and the Rosé.
Indeed. So I guess one of the questions we get often asked around sparkling is why orange? So we'll cover off very quickly. You know, orange and the day is getting cooler by the minute. The key factor about orange and being a good region for sparkling wine is that cool climate. That in orange comes through our elevation, but it gives us the key ingredients, which is varietally, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, and then high acidity, which is the key to making wines that will age gracefully. And this is the style we're making. These are wines that stay in bottle for a minimum of 5 years before they're released. And so they need that natural acidity that comes from a cool climate region like orange to make that style.
And the key, along with that high acidity, is that grown in a cool climate where the maturity is slow, like the sugar maturity is slow, what it allows is flavour development to come along. So we pick these at about, the grapes for these wines, at about 10.5 to 11 Beaumet or percent sugar. Now often for table wine we're in the 12.5 to 13. So it's a fair bit earlier, but it's when you grow the grapes in the right environment, it's amazing how much flavour they do have. So it's just not the acidity, it's the flavour that goes hand in hand. So we have a saying here, what we lack in latitude, we make up for in altitude. So we acknowledge that, you know, Tasmania is often seen as a leading light in Australian sparkling wine. Most of their vineyards are much further south, naturally, but they're at sea level. So the vineyard that these wines come from is 1,000 metres above sea level. So we certainly have that benefit of the height and the coolness, and often, not always, but often, we're harvesting these grapes at about the same time as northern Tasmania. So grown in essentially similar macroclimatic conditions. So
I should add at that point, and as a bit of a reminder, we didn't harvest any fruit this year due to the smoke, and on a day like this it's hard to imagine that bushfires were a problem for us this year. But as Drew said, that elevation is key to us making this style of wine. So I think we should probably jump into trying some.
Taste some.
People can,
although
you're welcome to drink as much as you like while you're sitting at home.
If you've got something in your glass, hopefully the Cuvée. Now, the Cuvée to us is a bit like, you know, your non-vintage from a champagne house. It's the entry level. It's the one that we make the most volume of, which is not a huge amount, but it's the one we make the most of. Fortunately, it has been incredibly successful for us, particularly on the show circuit. It has in the past, cleaned up at the local Orange Wine Show, including the best wine of show. Now, it's only the second time I can remember that a sparkling wine at any level of wine show has taken our best wine of show. The other one was at the Sydney Royal Show, the Royal Sydney Show, big show. But that was a great thrill and a great privilege. It's also won New South Wales Sparkling Wine of the Year, and even further back, it won the Sparkling Trophy at the Melbourne Wine Awards, which is probably Australia's most prestigious sparkling award. So it's just not us that's saying it good, it's other people that are saying it good, Dave.
Which is wonderful. I'm just going to add something here, just out of interest. You probably note we're not drinking out of wine champagne flutes. there is one, I don't believe it's necessary, so if you don't have them at home, certainly don't feel bad about drinking out of a standard wine glass. The thing it also does is helps elevate some of the aromatics out of the glass. That extra air and area within the glass just helps elevate some of those fruit flavours out of the glass. So if you don't have flutes, don't worry about it.
Don't worry, the champagne wine, don't worry about it much.
No.
If you go to tastings in Champagne, often they're out of standard wine glasses. So you'll have to remember that at the pointy end of sparkling, these should be considered wines first that happen to have bubbles in them, not just bubbly aperitif wines. They taste like wine. They're wine that have bubbles in them. So, there's nothing wrong with the standard wine glass.
So the cuvee is a non-vintage wine. So as with all champagne non-vintage wines, there is a base vintage to those wines, and then we blend in non-vintage components. Now we do that essentially to create consistency in style year to year. So in the cuvee, the base vintage for this wine is 2013. So while we're sitting here in 2020, you're looking at a wine with over 7 years age in bottle before it's released. So,
and at the bottom left hand, as you're looking at it, corner, it will have disgorgement number 6 and tirage date of 2013. So that indicates to you that it's the 2013 base, and it is the 6th disgorgement of the cuvee since we did the very first one, which started with the 2010 vintage. Which brings us, Dave, got any questions? Send them through to M on Instagram or Facebook, and we will do our best to answer them.
So, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So, two of the three most popular varietals in Champagne. Around 60-40, 60% Chardonnay, 40% Pinot Noir. So, very traditional in the style. And Drew can, he'll elaborate a little bit more on stylistically why we're making that wine in that percentage.
So when we started with Swift, if you ask any winemaker around orange, what's the strongest varietal here? Most, not all, but most will say Chardonnay. So back in 2010, it was quite natural for us to go, well, let's lead with Chardonnay in our sparkling wine because that's what we have the greatest understanding of. So up until the release of the Blanc de Noir later this year, basically all the Swift wines are Chardonnay dominant. As time has passed, we've got a greater understanding of how Pinot Noir from orange works in the sparkling context, and we're much more confident with it these days, but Chardonnay still plays the leading hand, and happily so, because it just grows really beautifully. So, like Dave said, it is fermented in tank and a little bit in barrel like any other white wine, and then different components are assessed. We make a blend, and we then do what we call the tirage bottling. So the tirage bottling, we prepare it for bottling like any other wine, and the day before we bottle it, we add a whole heap of sugar and a yeast culture to it. So you go from this beautiful clear wine that looks perfect, and you make it all cloudy again. But you do that, the yeast get going on the sugar before you bottle it. The next day you bottle it, and then it starts fermenting in bottle. And this is, so yeast converts sugar to alcohol and CO2. So your alcohol goes up a little bit and you get bubbles. So it's sealed with a crown seal, like your bottle of beer, and it builds up pressure. And then we just tuck it away. We taste it occasionally to make sure it's gone fermented dry again.
Make sure it's fermented.
And that it has bubbles. And basically we stick it in the warehouse for 5 years and do nothing. And 5 years later, or 6 years later, depending on the wine, we then go through another process called riddling, this is an old style riddling rack. And back in the day, I hope you can still see, They had highly skilled people that would come and turn that 1/8 of a turn. And they would do thousands of bottles a day. And the whole purpose of that would be to get the yeast that was in there to work its way down into the neck up against the crown seal, or the cork as in the old days. And then you could get rid of the deposit. These days they have a Giro pallet and it all happens in a week, whereas that took months. So what happens is the yeast, the bottle's inverted, the yeast cells all gather at the crown seal and all the wine is perfectly clear. You don't need to filter it again. Then there's fantastic machinery that freezes the neck of the bottle, pops the crown seal off, which spits out the yeast, flips it up, tops it, puts a cork in it, and you lose very little pressure and very little volume. It also gives the opportunity to top that volume up, and that solution, that liqueur that we do that with, you can be really creative with that. You can put whatever you like. You can put oaky wine in there. Some people put a little bit of brandy spirit. Some people just use the same wine to do it again. Some people add more or less sugar just to balance that acidity. You know, you can do whatever you like, really. We usually just use the wine that we're disgorging at the time, and we do trials to judge how dry, sweet, how much acid balance we want in the finished wine. So, you know, that's a really interesting part, because a lot of sparkling wine production involves crystal ball gazing, because it's always changing. You're never dealing with an end product until you get to disgorgement. So there you're doing less crystal ball gazing. So, look, if it was up to us, we'd probably make them drier because we like acidity and we like dry wines, but we don't buy a lot of it ourselves. You guys are the ones that buy it, and maybe you guys don't like, you know, screeching acidity like we necessarily do. So it's about balance. How dry can we keep it, and how much sugar do we have to add so that the majority of people will enjoy it and enjoy the balance of it.
The thing to note there, if I could add, these two wines we're tasting today, the Cuvée and the Rosé, are what we would describe as our entry level in the Swift range. So the other two wines that are vintage wines tend to be drier on the spectrum because they tend to have more of a house style, and that is styles of wines that Drew's explaining there that we tend to like to drink a bit drier. And so those wines tend to showcase that with a lower addition of sugar.
And what you also get after 5 years of sitting in the bottle, and what happens is all those yeast cells start disintegrating and they release aromas and flavours and change the texture of the wine. So you get more complexity and more richness. So when you get that over time, then it gives you the opportunity of adding less sugar when you disgorge, because you have that natural richness. When you do sparkling wines very young, you don't have that richness. You probably need a bit more sugar to balance the acidity. So time is your friend.
I might just jump in there very quickly with the question.
Yeah,
the question, do the wines vary much each time before you disgorge them?
Basically, the wine, if we're disgorging a batch that, like 2013, a batch of that, pretty much all the bottles are the same. There is very slight variations depending on how the yeast have gone in a particular bottle, but you know, we do analysis across a number of bottles and they're pretty much the same.
What does change, however, is that this wine you're drinking now, which is number 6, Cuvée number 6, is the third disgorgement of that particular tirage bottling. So we do see a change in that base wine over time. So it may have been a 12-month period between the first and the final disgorgement of that wine. And during that period, the wine softens further. We get a bit more texture out of that contact with the yeast leaves in the bottle. So the wonderful thing about sparkling champagne, if the wine has the structural elements you need, the longer you leave it, the better it tends to get. So the benefit of drinking a wine like this, which is the final disgorgement of the 2013, is such that you're getting a wine of infinite more quality and complexity as we keep it. So let's have a drink, everyone. The Cuvée, non-vintage Cuvée, 60% Chardonnay, 40% Pinot Noir. As I said, it's now about 7 years since we bottled that wine, and you see that immediately. There's lovely fruit forwardness, but there's a lovely textural element to the middle of the palate here, and the acid that kicks in to really pull it through and draw it through, and that's really the key to really good quality sparkling or champagne, is that acid retention. It should remain vibrant with tension on the palate as you drink it.
And there's a balance to it. It finishes dry, and there's a kind of mouth-watering quality that, you know, it invites you to take another sip of it. So, you know, you can't get this level of complexity without being patient, without putting the time. So I hope, you know, as you're tasting it there, that you can see that it is just not a simple aromatic wine with bubbles in it. There's some richness there, what we call autolysis.
My apologies if you can hear this rain. It is really pissing down.
So autolysis is the yeast-derived characteristic. So, you know, bready, doughy, brioche characters, and you get some richness through the mid-palate. So hopefully, you know, you're enjoying the added level of complexity that only time can bring. But the great thing is, you know, this is a 7-year-old white wine, fresh as a daisy, but complex at the same time. And this is the great thing about these wines, is they stay so fresh.
They do too, and the other added benefit now is wines like this, you'll be able to put a stopper on it and put it back in the fridge. They'll be fine tomorrow. Yeah. They lose a tiny bit of their effervescence and that bubble, but in terms of the quality and the flavour, you'll see really no difference between finishing it today or opening them and finishing them tomorrow. You'll be fine too. So don't feel like you have to finish both bottles tonight. They'll be fine tomorrow as well.
Do put a good airtight seal in it though, because I hate to do it, but the old teaspoon in the neck doesn't work.
Doesn't count for anything.
All the gas just escapes anyway. So what you got to do is make an airtight seal so that the gas doesn't keep escaping.
So guys, if you have another glass, pour some rosé and we'll have a bit of a discussion around that. If not, drink up, finish what you've got, and we'll move on.
Excuse my sacrilege. When there's one glass, it's called drink or dump time.
So rosé. So again here we've got a non-vintage wine. We actually, up until this disgorgement, which is number 3, this wine was a vintage wine previously to this. So it was a 2012, we did 11 and a 12, and we made the decision to simplify the portfolio and to add to the Cuvée another non-vintage wine. We had a lot of calls from customers who were pouring champagnes but couldn't pour sparkling rosé champagnes because of their expense, and so we wanted to match them together. So this disgorgement became a non-vintage wine. You'll see immediately that it's, in terms of the colour, when we talk about rosé, what comes to mind is a really, you know, pinky blush, and you'll see immediately with this there's a sort of a bronzy tone to it. Yeah. And it is a really light blush. It's a very pale.
It's not pink.
Rosé, because rosé first and foremost is a style. It's not just about making a coloured wine. It's about creating a style of wine that differs. And in this instance, you'll see immediately that extra richness that comes through comparatively to the Cuvée. So again, as I was saying, a non-vintage wine. If we go back to the fact that these are always from a base vintage. With the rosé, we're actually, our base here is 2012, so we're verging on 8 years now for a wine, and immediately as you drink it, you can see that freshness retain, which still baffles me and amazes me that we can make wines, not just us, but Orange as a region, and stylistically make wines that are still so fresh after 8 years in terms of their making and opening to consume.
And so, I'll just jump in at that point. I had a question from Eugene. Drew, in your opinion, how do these wines differ to champagne?
They're not grown in Champagne.
All
Look,
wines.
in terms of the way they are made, they don't differ at all. We use exactly the same technique. So we call these method traditional, which we've been legislated to call it that. In the old days, it used to be called method champenoise. So you basically had to follow exactly the same methodology as the champenoise did in Champagne. So the difference is, and the only real difference, I suppose, is that in Champagne, the grapes are grown in Champagne, and in Swift wines, the grapes are grown in orange.
Correct. And you'll see those. You see it with Chardonnay and Burgundy. You see it with Pinot Noir and Burgundy. You see it with Cabernet and Bordeaux. You see it across all different vintages. There's an underlying stylistic thing that is common, but then you see that terroir. You see the influence of the soil and the climate of each different region. And as Tyson Stelzer mentioned to me some years ago, these are wines that speak of orange, as do great wines and sparklings of Adelaide Hills, of Tasmania, of Champagne. They're of the same quality often, but they have distinct differences that are that of their climate and their region.
So if you put these wines, if you're lucky enough to have a bottle of champagne in the fridge as we're doing this, and you're willing to crack it open, the whole point is that these wines should taste different to champagne because of where they're grown. The important thing is that we would like to think that these wines, next to champagne, hold their own in terms of quality and value.
The other thing to remember in tasting these is if you are putting this next to a champagne, chances are if you've got a bottle of Veuve, the time it's spent on its lees, so that is stored after fermentation, will be significantly less than these are here. So stylistically, you're actually looking at styles of wines that are more akin to the reserve or late disgorged wines of Champagne than they are the general release, the Moet and Veuves.
And they'll be damn sight more expensive.
They'll be damn what I'm trying to tell you is these are really good value.
So with rosé, there's two ways of making rosé. Both are employed in Champagne and elsewhere in doing this, is that you can blend, so to make the colour, you make red wine out of Pinot Noir or Pinot Meunier, and you blend it in to the base wine. You can do that prior to tirage bottling. The trouble is that, with fermentation and yeast and 5 years in the bottle, your colour fades. There's a lot of crystal ball gazing, and that's just another bit of crystal ball gazing because you've got no idea what your colour's going to look like at disgorgement. So the other way of doing it is that you add the red wine, Pinot Noir, at disgorgement. Therefore, you can do the trial, you can do some tasting and aromatic trials, you can see what your colour's going to be. It's all a lot more predictable. So that's what we do. We add some red wine into our liqueur at disgorgement, and like Dave was saying, the actual hue of the colour, as long as it has some colour, isn't that important, So there's no real pink, it's just bronze. But that's when we add the red wine to it at disgorgement, and and we're talking about maybe 2 or 3%
total volume.
Of the total volume of the bottle. And for me, it's amazing what 2 or 3% of Pinot Noir being added to that base wine, the impact that it has.
For me, I see that really in that mid-palate. You see that lovely creaminess and texture, that sort of Pinot fruit come through in the mid-palate.
It's that red strawberry.
That red strawberry fruit that you shall see in that mid-palate, and that's what that richness, that's that rosé characteristic and style that we're shooting for. And again here, for a 2012, remember 2012, if you can remember back that far, was a really cool vintage. So you do see that lovely line of acid that holds and retains that flavour through the palate, right through the palate. Interestingly enough, the presumption of these wines are that they're Pinot dominant. No. This wine is actually Chardonnay dominant, so it's a very similar proportional blend than the Cuvée. So Chardonnay, Pinot, and then as Drew mentioned, 2% table Pinot at disgorging that gives it that richness and that colour to make it a rosé.
And I've just had a quick question. Does the clone make a difference with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir?
Yes, it does. Of course, but
you know, there's some new, well, they're not so new generation clones of Chardonnay now, like Clone 95, which has come out of Burgundy. Really good for table wine. I'd be less inclined to use that for sparkling wine. It's just all a bit too much, a bit too rich. IV10-1 is the predominant, well, is the clone of Chardonnay that goes into these wines. I like that it has Chardonnay flavour, but, you know, allows other stuff to come through. So, you know, with time in bottle, all that autolysis, brioche, bready, doughy character gets to come through.
And on the other side, the Pinot side, we tend to just stick with 114, 115.
115,
really, that have lovely fruitfulness without too much structure, which is what we want here, that lovely aromatic.
We don't want lots of tannin.
Now, the other thing to add here, the rosé was the New South Wales Wine of the Year this year. So 2 years in a row with the Swift Wines, the two you have in front of you there, have won the New South Wales Sparkling of the Year, and in total 9 trophies and 60 medals over the last 4 years. So, and that's across regional shows, but also, you know, Royal Queensland, Royal Adelaide, Melbourne.
Big shows.
Big shows. So, you know, we're really proud of the way they're sort of fitting in. And as we mentioned earlier, they're not a replacement for Champagne or Tasmanian wines. They are unique in their own right, and they should sit beside those styles rather than dominate them.
So I'll preempt a question I'm sure we'll probably get. How sweet are these? So they're both about 5 to 5.5 grams a litre. So for instance, as Dave was saying, with more time on lees, you get more richness, it changes slightly. So for the Cuvée, for instance, the disgorgement number 5 was 6.5 grams a litre, and for disgorgement number 6, it dropped down to 6 grams a litre, and disgorgement number 7, which has been done but not released, I don't think, is down to 5.5. So it's just a little bit less each time.
And to keep that in perspective,
and the rosé's about the same.
Yeah, so if you're drinking champagne that is a brut style, you are essentially that is less than 12. So it is not uncommon for champagnes to be up in that 9, 10, 11 range. So these are
pushing 12.
These are by
on
nature of their age very low. So yeah, when we talk about 5.5 grams, that is very low in the sweetness spectrum.
Yeah. And a lot of your big brand champagnes will be really pushing that 10, 11, 12 barrier because they're looking for mass market appeal. And if you put them side by side, you may not notice it when you drink those big brand non-vintage wines by themselves, but you put them next to these and suddenly you see the difference.
Now, for those who want to just move on, you've done your tasting and you want to go and do the dishes or make dinner, I'll just finish up very briefly. You can still order our varietal pack. There are 2 more tastings that come in that, so retrospectively you can go back and listen to this and taste those. But we've got a Chardonnay and Shiraz in that pack, so next week we're doing Chardonnay, the week after that we're doing Shiraz, so you can still order online. Remember to use the free delivery coupon code, so they come to your door free. But for those who would like to stick around and ask some questions, very happy to answer. I'll also just add, if you would like to, obviously, for those who have interest in sparkling, the wines we're not tasting, we can't do everything. The vintage and the Blanc de Blanc, in their own right, are wonderful wines. They obviously are a little bit more expensive, but they tend to be a bit more, as I said, a house style. So they are wines that we like to drink. And the way we blend these wines, in terms of a brand that has multiple tiers, similar to the Printhie brand, we blend from the Blanc de Blanc down. So we blend from our flagship wine backwards. So they really are very smart, and I'd highly recommend anybody who's into sparkling wines to give them a try.
And just jumping in there very quickly, for Mark, he's got a disgorgement number 7 in his pack. We
Right.
tasted number 7
yes.
did we?
Well,
We actually, that's a very good point.
the disgorgement number 7 is the current one. So that was disgorged back in
Just
December,
prior to Christmas.
prior to Christmas, and Dave must have picked up.
Yeah. And Mark, to be honest, this bottle came out of the fridge here at the packing shed. Number 7 is what our current stock is, and personally, I actually think it's the best of them. It is, as Drew said, as they get older, the later the disgorging, the lower in sugar they are. And I think the balance in that wine is better than the number 6.
Yeah,
I think it's come down about half to a gram of sugar, and the acid sugar balance is better. So I actually think it's a better wine.
And the disgorgement number 7 is the last of the
Is the current
2013 base wine. So this is one of the other weird things, but great things about sparkling wine, is that disgorgement number 8 will actually be a leap back in time to the 2012. So when we finished the 2011 base, and we needed to move on to a vintage, we looked at 2012 and 2013, and 2013 was a very warm vintage, much warmer than 2012, and we thought it was looking a bit more developed and a bit more forward. So we went with 2013, knowing that the much more acidic and tighter 2012 would be fine, sitting there for a bit while yet. So it'll be really interesting. I'm really excited about the 2012. Going on the quality of the 12 vintage and the 12 rosé, I'm really excited to do the first disgorgement of the 2012 cuvée. When we get around to that, maybe mid-year for release later this year. So enjoy 7 while it lasts, and then there'll be a change with disgorgement number 8.
And we've just had a question, is it free delivery to Sydney? Yes, it's
Free delivery Australia-wide.
For as little as one bottle.
As little as a bottle. So, yes, free delivery everywhere.
And another question, is this rain good at this time of year?
This rain is wonderful.
Yes.
We're not harvesting. Obviously, that time has passed. And what we missed last year was really good winter, really good spring rainfall. Now, we're obviously just in autumn, but even today we commented, looking out the windows in the office at the winery, that the water's starting to run across the ground, which is a lovely indication that the profile is building. So I would say, that every indication at this stage that rain's going to stick around, and fingers crossed for a really wet summer, winter and spring.
Well, there's more due tomorrow, so
it's wonderful.
a good thing.
And another sort of final question, why aren't more people drinking sparkling rosé as much as they drink rosé as a still wine, or is that not the case in Ireland?
No, interesting question, because rosé table wine seems to be going off its nuts around the world. Rosé sparkling wine, in terms of champagne, has been a really tiny part of their production and their sales historically for a long time.
They've also, if I could just add, they've also traditionally been vintage wines.
Correct.
Which made them more expensive. So we didn't see a lot of them in Australia. So it's only up until recently that we've started to see them flood the market.
So yes, it's a small part, traditionally it's a small part of the sparkling wine market. It has been more expensive, it's been made in small quantities, it is picking up, and there are some champagne non-vintage available now, but traditionally it's just not been a big part of it. Now, I'm just throwing this out there. If you guys are keen, I suppose, and your interest has been piqued by this tasting, you want to do a more comprehensive Swift sparkling tasting, if you express your interest in doing that, maybe we can,
Definitely. It's not like we've got anything else to do at the moment.
So, maybe we can send out in time, once we get through everything else.
A full Swift pack.
A full Swift pack, and we can do a full Swift tasting if you guys are interested in doing that. If you're not, we'll move on to something else.
Any more questions?
We've had some great viewing today. We've had some friends from Singapore join us.
Wonderful.
Hello, Singapore.
A vineyard in Napa Valley.
Excellent.
Oh, wonderful.
Vineyard, hello. and some great support from the locals, so thank you very much. And then probably the last question is, what are we going to be drinking tonight?
Well, there's a couple of bottles of Swift open tonight. Although, looking at this weather, I think I'm going to open a bottle of Cabernet, probably.
Look, the thing to remember with sparkling is don't pigeonhole them as an aperitif. These wines, because of that richness and the texture that they have, go really well with food. So don't feel that, you just need to drink them before dinner. Drink them with dinner. Things like creamy chicken or pastas are fine. Fish is fantastic. They're really quite versatile, and hopefully, when we get the new cellar door built and up and running up on the hill in the post-corona world, one thing I'd really look forward to, I hope we can do, is sparkling dinners, where basically we drink and pair nothing but sparkling wines with a whole range of foods. So, things with the richer ones, things like, salmon is great. So, they're incredibly versatile wines. So, drink them with dinner tonight.
Yeah. Sounds good. And I think if we just say thank you to everyone for putting up the sound.
Yeah, thank you everyone. We do, well, actually I don't apologise. The rain's good, but I hope you can hear us okay.
We've been speaking very loud.
I know. I thank you very much for joining us. Part of my role at Printhie is travelling around and doing dinners and tastings around the place, and something that I always finish with, that I'll share with you, is probably as important now as it ever has been, is support your local businesses, drink local, eat local, and that is truer today than it has been ever. So I thank you all for those who had ordered the wine.
Apart from those of you in Singapore where there are no vineyards, support us.
And it doesn't matter where you are, always think about the family businesses and the small businesses that support the communities you live in. So thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you next Friday at 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock. Thank you.
Cheers.